Good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to another episode of Unnati. For wherever you log in, I'm the host of Unnati, Arjun Mishra, this side from NABIT India, and it's such a pleasure to host another episode of this podcast on inclusion and diversity. I have the Director of Finance, Mr. Samir Madan of Agilent India today. It's such a pleasure having you on the show, sir.
Thank you, Arjun. Thank you
Samir,
for
sir, for
having
the
me.
audience. Samisa, you have had a very rich and a long experience working for corporate India, and I understand you must have had various stints in the subject of diversity and inclusion and how you see it. Just to get you acquainted with how we have the podcast, sir, uh, something which is very important and which I urge my guests to participate with. More than corporate jargons, we want the individual to speak about how closely they associate with the cause and how it's important, but keeping it as raw and the best way to express it. And since I have the honor of hosting such a rich experienced person, I would request that also if possible from you.
Sure, absolutely, Arjun.
Thank you so much. So we start with the podcast. A little introduction about yourself, please, and your experience working in corporate India across the various roles for the audience. If you could start with that.
Sure, thanks, Arjun. And hello, everybody who's watching the webcast. So, my name is Samir Madan. I work as the Director of Finance of Agilent Technologies India. It's been about 18 years I've been with Agilent. Agilent is a life sciences and a biotechnology company. We are a US listed company and having operations in many countries, including India. Prior to this, I worked with General Electric as well as
Mm-hmm.
PricewaterhouseCoopers. I am a qualified chartered accountant. I am also a US CPA. I am also a company secretary. So I have had a length and breadth of experience in multiple finance roles all through my career, which is now almost 30 years.
Wonderful, sir. Uh, so, if you would define your style of leadership and how do you see diversity and inclusion as it should be, some 2 cents on that, sir, if possible.
See, let me first start with diversity and inclusion because this is a term
Mm-hmm.
or a phrase which is used often and everybody
Yes,
has a different interpretation for it. I mean, there is no
absolutely.
standard interpretation, and that is what
Mm-hmm.
DNI is all about. Nobody can define DNI in a specific terminology, but
Right.
broadly or directionally, what it means is that human beings by nature are different, and it's a duty to take everybody along. Right from our school days, if you remember, whether in
Mm-hmm.
kindergarten, UKG, LKGs, the multiple classes we attended, there were folks from all over the country with us,
Mm-hmm.
different kind of batchmates. At
Mm-hmm.
that time, we didn't appreciate the diversity, but it was always there. Obviously, you were more closer to a certain set, not so close with others, but we had a habit to take everybody along.
Right.
And I think that was the first introduction to
Absolutely.
diversity. And the first seeds of inclusion were done by the class teacher, your various subject teachers, the principal, to take everybody along. There were guys who used to top the school. There were some who didn't do so well. But by the time we grew up, we fell in love with each other. And that was the first taste
Right.
of diversity and inclusion. Both of them go hand in hand, but to some extent, diversity is given, inclusion is not. And I think it's more
Mm.
important to make sure that we include everybody, like we did in our school days, college days. And life tells you that, there is no one size fit all. Those who we expected to do very well in life didn't do so
Mm.
well. There were some dark horses. At the end of the
Yeah.
day, while we come towards retirement, all of us will do
Mm.
well. And I think if you have
Mm.
that principle in mind, we will
Mm.
take everybody together.
Right.
Specifically in corporate life, I think as you grow older, as you see various teams collaborating, adding value, and making sure that you listen to the feedback and the thought process of everybody is
Right.
very enriching as you draw up the company strategy. because what I see, maybe others don't. And the
Right.
corollary is what others see, I don't. So making
Makes
sure
sense.
that in our day-to-day discourse, we have folks who have different viewpoints, at least bring it to the table. We then will debate on it and maybe not
Mm,
accept it, but keep that in the
mm,
back of our mind to make sure that we also address their thought process. So that's how I think corporate
mm,
India should address it. That's how I've
mm.
addressed it. We go into a
Okay.
meeting with a certain strategy, but we want
Mhm.
others to have a healthy debate of why the strategy will succeed and what are the areas which we should be watchful of.
So, in a global organization, much like yours, which you've been serving, I think beyond diversity in the talent pool, there is a lot to do also for the need for having diversity in the leadership. Because, like you rightly pointed out, when there is a difference in viewpoints, and I remember when we were speaking the other day, you mentioned that's what leads to progress. And I found that to be so enamoring and so enchanting thoughts that I would not want my audience to be devoid of that rich thought that you shared about an experience of an organization which was at one time uh, at the peak and then went into oblivion because of lack of leadership. Um, if you could share more thoughts on that, sir, and for the audience, your viewpoint, which you expressed beautifully, sir, when we spoke about it. If you could reiterate that, sir. Thank you.
Sure, Arjun. So in modern day, the businesses and the business models are changing so fast that it's
Hmm.
impossible for one individual or a set of individuals in the leadership team to know and track what's happening all around us.
Absolutely.
Business models are changing so fast, and the world is getting globalized to an extent where the business models may not be even relevant as early as 3 months from now. That is why
Hmm.
it's very important to have a team which speaks up, which tells you what's going on at the ground level, which catches the trend. A trend is your friend,
Hmm.
remember, and
Hmm.
who best than your entire extended team, right till a person who's a security guard, to everybody
Right.
else in the rank and order of the company, to tell you
Hmm.
what they're seeing. The average time which a Fortune 100 company now spends in that elite club is only 18 years. It was more than 40
Hmm.
years, just 20 years back. If you look
Hmm.
at the year 2000, Google was not a
Right.
major player, Amazon wasn't a
Hmm.
major player. And who knows, in
Hmm.
2043, 20 years from now, will Google or Alphabet be amongst the top seven countries? I don't know.
Hmm.
Are they
Hmm.
more in line with artificial intelligence than, let's say, NVIDIA? I don't know. And
Hmm.
why is one company more successful than the other? It's only
Hmm.
because the leadership team over there first listened to different viewpoints, which
Hmm.
means that you allowed others to speak up, which means that you made a environment where speaking up was something which was encouraged.
Right.
You need to be very patient for you to kind of develop that habit or that culture in the company. So the
Hmm.
tone from the top should be to kind of listen to what everybody else is saying. And specifically for
Hmm.
that business, Arjun, what is more
Hmm.
important is to see how the competition is doing, how the
Right.
environment is doing, how geopolitics is panning out. And for that,
Hmm.
as many conversation as you can have with your colleagues all over the world, adopt the best practices, and make sure that you kind of documenting everything and referring
Right.
it back to what you discussed, and have key takeaways. Those are all
Hmm.
aspects which will help you stay relevant. And diversity is of thoughts, diversity of business models, your ability to catch the trend is very, very critical, because businesses won't survive. I mean, is
Hmm.
Amazon scared of ONDC? For sure. Is
Hmm.
top bank in
Absolutely.
India scared of UPI? Yes. Another
Hmm.
saying which I caught was banking is a must, but banks are not. You look at the
Hmm.
small finance banks, you
Hmm.
look at all these fintech companies, they're
Right.
eating away your pie. Why? Because,
Hmm.
the biggies thought that they will never be uprooted. That's the best
Right.
example of diversity of thought, diversity of speed, diversity of action. So, diversity is the DNA of your business strategy, is what I would say. And consequently, inclusion. Because
Hmm.
without diversity, inclusion is not possible.
Absolutely.
I
And
don't
I
want to have
think,
clones, right? I don't want to have clones of Samir or my colleagues
hmm.
in the leadership team. I need people who tell me a different viewpoint. And then we can draw up strategies to incorporate that different viewpoint in the same
Hmm.
business model. I mean, how do I tackle it? But if I'm not aware, if I'm not knowing what's happening all around me, then I may be
Hmm.
living in an island.
I absolutely concur, sir. But I think, unfortunately, and while it's injurious to business, we have a culture which is slightly patriarchal, and unfortunately, it extends to the corporate world too. Often, people, prefer to not show their disdain or difference in thoughts, and to speak up for their opinion for obvious reasons. They don't want to be on the wrong side of people. Potentially that maybe just exaggerating, but could be a potential career threat. So they would prefer to conquer with the common viewpoint and let that go on at the cost of saving their um, you know at the buck stopping at their table. They would prefer it sliding to the next one to save themselves. Yes, it's injurious. In the overarching theme, it's injurious to the company's future, like you rightly pointed out. But I think that cultural change, unfortunately, there hasn't um, been able to be questioned or spoken about. I think the upcoming generation is a little more adventurous when it comes to speaking up. Maybe the gen which came after me. I stand at 34, so I'm talking about the people in the mid 20s, perhaps. Uh, but then, what are your thoughts on how can that culture be promoted to get people to speak up without the fear of a potential problem for themselves?
So you hit the nail on the head, Arjun. And I think
Hmm.
one of the reasons why people don't speak up is that the elementary education which we provide
Hmm.
doesn't encourage speaking up. Let me share an anecdote with you. When I was
Hmm.
going to school, and we
Hmm.
used to have various debating competitions, and one day I went up to my principal and I told him that why do we have to give the topic of the debate 2 weeks in advance? What kids are doing
Hmm.
is that they are tapping onto their parents' intelligence, their siblings' intelligence, come up with a
Hmm.
drafted speech and then just rattling it off, and they come
Hmm.
out as winners. So are we
Hmm.
encouraging innovation in debating? And this is, I'm telling you, what, 35 years back, right?
Okay. Hmm.
The principal
Hmm.
was flabbergasted. So half
Hmm.
the problem is most people in corporate life are not very good in communicating. So the
Okay.
art of communicating a different viewpoint has not
Hmm.
been mastered, where it was
Hmm.
left for the elite who could speak. And that is why it becomes in your DNA. So you don't know how to, in a very, very sophisticated manner or in a non
Hmm.
threatening manner, put
Hmm.
across a different viewpoint. That to me
Hmm.
is a fundamental issue which many corporates face. The employees are
Right.
not confident enough to speak. If they know how to put across a different viewpoint in a
Hmm.
manner where it can be accepted, there'll be no
Right.
retaliation, it's a lot
Hmm.
easier. So I think as leaders and those companies which encourage a better atmosphere for folks to speak up. And remember, speaking up is a virtue which should happen at every level.
Hmm.
Somehow
Hmm.
confusion only up to the board level or the C suite level or maybe one level downwards. No, it should
Hmm.
happen from bottoms up. And that is how it should be encouraged. So my
Right.
suggestion to most corporate, both on the employee side and the leadership side, and remember, I
Hmm.
don't ever use the word management. It's only leadership
Hmm.
and employees. Because
Right.
management is again a dividing term, and I'm quite surprised
Absolutely.
how some of the top B schools also still use the word management.
Hmm. Hmm.
It should be replaced by the word leadership, and it's a
Hmm.
colonial mindset that management versus workers or
Hmm.
so I think just encouraging folks to speak up,
Hmm.
ideas which can be pretty much game changers,
Hmm.
and that should reach to the C suite level is something which has to be encouraged. Now, it's easier said than done. Some industries where communication is ingrained in the DNA of every employee, it's
Hmm.
relatively easier. But for a old generation brick and mortar industry, it's more complicated. And that's
Hmm.
why the more we invest in communication stroke soft skill trainings
Hmm.
and tell folks to master the art of how you convey what you plan to,
Right.
they become a lot easier, and you set up examples, and just the entire environment becomes a lot more affable. So those are my thoughts on how we can encourage people to speak up. For example, Agilent has a value
Hmm.
called speaking up.
Okay.
So every company has values. So one of the
Hmm.
values which we recently introduced was speaking up,
Okay. Very nice. Hmm.
so that
So,
we kind of have a environment where we know we can speak up
okay.
and tell them examples. So if you're not comfortable in speaking up in public, is there a
Hmm.
hotline number where you can just call and speak up? Can you
Hmm.
send a voice recorded message?
Hmm.
Can you send an anonymous email?
Hmm.
A lot of examples I can share from the finance community, which is more from the internal audit standpoint, are leads which we get from whistleblowers. And
Okay.
when a
Okay.
whistleblower has the confidence to tell you stuff which is happening, every
Hmm.
employee should, right? And it should be nipped in the bud itself. So various things can help, provided the tone from the top is to be aware of what's happening
Welcoming.
in the
Hmm.
company and have ways and means to encourage every rank and file to speak up.
That's really important because eventually the fear of authority at different levels,
Yeah.
abstains many from participating in this because eventually I think it's also to do with lot to do with the general economic turmoil. People feel that let's save our job for the time being. We can keep voicing our opinion and our thoughts for ourselves, but then it's so important and relevant to also differ in thoughts. At most times when we don't do that, it eventually costs the company its existence in the long
Yeah.
run, like you rightly pointed out.
I can
So
give you examples. Like you look at Nokia. I mean, all our cell phones were Nokia, right? I mean, that company doesn't exist on the cell phone market. I mean, they're
mm,
still on the networks, but
mm,
not
mm,
there. I mean, you look at ONDC, what it's doing to Amazon and Flipkarts. I mean, new
mm,
business models are coming up because those guys never realized what's happening all around you. So,
mm,
ability
mm,
to connect with the last man standing, even your, security guard. I mean, he has enough insights to share. So
right.
keep your ears and eyes open, be welcoming, create various platforms. Unfortunately, most people think it's only the C suite and the top leadership
Mm,
where you have to go and tell them how you think or how you feel. So aspects like, for example, can you have lunch with a random employee once every week or once every 2 weeks?
mm,
Can you have
mm,
some kind of a regular connect where you pick up folks you can have a general chat with? It's your ability to get to the pulse of the floor. How often do you take a walk when you go to grab your coffee or go
mm,
for a break? Speak with employees,
right.
get the pulse of the floor. So the glass ceiling has to be broken.
No, absolutely, sir. Absolutely. And since you have in Agilent, and otherwise, it's been something which has been relevant and important, sir. If you could share some insights on how has Agilent have some matrices in place to measure the performance of its D&I activities, any parameters or matrices which could be replicated or customized for companies for their own, in their own operation, but a broad, outline of how have you been able to measure how how good or bad has been the DNI outreach for the organization or the performance on the DNI standards.
So before I share examples of what we do as measuring DNI, I'll just put a caveat that sometimes when you put a target or a absolute measure, people just find a roundabout way of meeting it, and nothing actually changes on the ground. In fact, it actually hampers it. So you have to be very careful that when you set up a metric, change the ground reality first and then put a metric. Don't put a metric first and expect the ground reality to change. It's like bringing a horse to a pond. He may not drink water. So coming back to Agilent, so for example, what we do is whenever we have a new job posting, we don't have a metric that we need to have diversity in hiring, because that may mean that we compromise on a candidate based on gender. But we ensure that a certain percentage of all the CVs which get selected have representation from all genders. Now, certain jobs may have lesser percentage, but at least every job has certain percentage of CVs coming in from all genders, so we have a good representation. The second thing which we do is we actively track data and just display it to everybody. The gender composition, the average salary, the differential salary, the stuff around the number of promotions, so that people are aware. And once you just present the data, that normally does the trick rather than putting a number that this is your target. The third thing we do is we have a lot of informal sessions with all our employees. So, for example, we have a D&I club, we have various levels of engagement happening, and we have these sessions which are not just limited, for example, to one gender. Because, if we have to address diversity, we have to take both the two genders along. We can't expect only one gender to kind of bridge the gap. One of the good trainings we did, which was kind of liked, was how do women handle finances? Many a times we've seen that, handling finances is left to one gender versus the other gender.
Correct.
And it's very important for both the genders to know basics of finance. Similarly, whenever we do programs, we try and make sure that it addresses the needs of both genders, so that we start having a culture where we're progressing together hand in hand. So the objective should be to have data for sure, but not necessarily have a specific target. I've seen many companies who have a specific target, they somehow meet it, but nothing changes on the ground. If at all, it goes from bad to worse to a disaster. And as they say, nobody can stop an idea whose time has come. And I think this time has come. You can actually see the change at the ground level in our personal lives, in the society where we stay. And I think technology has played a big role, Arjun. The more we use technology in our day-to-day lives, I think the gender disparity reduces. And I always say that, multitasking, having focus comes better to the women gender than men. And, as we start opening up technology, this gap is already beginning to narrow. Of course, there's still a long way to go, especially in the brick and mortar industry. But that is changing.
Absolutely.
You see what's happening in the armed forces. You see all around. You go to the pink metro station in Greater Noida that's
Mm,
manned by transgenders. So this is the
mm,
example which I give to everybody. Not many people know that there is a pink metro station on the Greater Noida Metro line, which is
mm.
manned all by transgenders. So
Wonderful.
stuff
Wonderful.
about
Mm,
making your offices accessible to differently abled people, just changing the society bottoms up. And all the
mm,
programs which you do, it's not necessary that leadership has to participate. Leave it to
mm.
others, and
Yeah,
you'll
lead the
see
way.
the change actually being embraced a lot better.
And I think that also leads to the the possibility of empowering the second tier to lead in the future is when
Oh,
you
yeah.
trust them with the responsibility of successfully implementing as something as small as an event to something which can potentially in the future be a decision towards navigating the future of the organization. I think it starts from small tasks where not everything has to come to the leadership. Let the second tier take decisions and implement.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
of course, they have the oversight of leaders who are of course coming with their years of experience and the insights to back it. But let the next tier also make some calls.
Yeah.
Uh,
Not just tier two, Arjun, tier three, tier four, and give
Plus,
honest
plus.
feedback. See, half
Mm,
the issues I've seen, and I like to link it with how we give feedback.
mm,
It's very important that corporates
mm,
crack the best way of giving feedback. What
mm,
may work in company A may not work in company B, but
mm.
honest feedback has to be given to everybody. I see discrimination even in giving feedback. So,
Thanks.
sandwich feedback is a concept which, I think Harvard came up with. You
Mm,
basically hide the message in the sandwich feedback. So SBI way of
mm,
doing the situational behavior and impact way of doing feedback, you know, honest
mm,
feedback, if it is given upfront in your career, you become a lot more confident,
mm.
you become a lot more aware of how you can improve your overall personality. And I always say that 70% of your career is in your own hands, only 30% is left with
Mm,
the organization. But for that you need to get feedback, for that you need to have diverse opinion about everything, for that you need confidence. And it's a two-way street, that you go one step, the organization goes one step, and somewhere you find a very nice equilibrium of promoting diversity, of making sure everybody is included, and you're encouraged to improve.
So something important which I felt should be discussed many a times with the fear that we may err in our decision making or there can be a mistake potentially. People would want not to be in that position and thus would want decisions to be taken by someone else so that eventually if it goes the other way we are spared the responsibility for that. Now that then defines how the culture is in the organization. Do you give a room or an opportunity for a person? Of course success is celebrated, it goes without saying, but then for every success it goes the law states that there would be fewer successes and more failures potentially in a decision. That's how and that is why it's so celebrated. Now when you give the opportunity for an employee to also fail in a potential decision, I think that that gives them more room to experiment with their ideas and then the opportunity to voice their opinion. You have served, like you mentioned, sir, 32 years, and how have you, in your leadership journey, given room to experiment, the given room to fail for your subordinates or your colleagues that you have worked with? Some thoughts to that, sir.
So, Arjun, you bring in a very nice point again. And to some extent, I don't agree with it, because normally decision making is not done by one person. And the fact
Mm-hmm.
that we have diverse viewpoints, we
Mm-hmm.
collectively arrive at a decision. See,
Okay.
corporates have a very nice environment where whenever you take a decision, there is normally a team which sits and debates and thrashes it out. If it's a
Mm-hmm.
unanimous decision, then it's a lot easy. If it's not,
Hmm.
sometimes you end up voting. But
Hmm.
for every contentious decision, then you're right, there'll be a lot of contentious decisions. And if you
Hmm.
don't take risks, you will not be in business. Remember, every
Absolutely.
company is in the business of taking risks.
Hmm. Hmm.
If you
Hmm.
don't take risks, your lunch will be eaten away by somebody else. So to
Hmm.
me, the whole concept of diversity and inclusion actually
Hmm.
empowers you to take the decision, because
Okay.
as and when you come up to take a call on one particular aspect of a decision, you debate, and it's lovely that people have a different viewpoint. You
Okay.
debate it, you document
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
and then when you leave the room, you say that, okay, there were six people in the room, two had very valuable inputs. We
Hmm.
contemplated about it, we came up with mitigants, and these are those mitigants,
Hmm.
and this is the final decision.
Hmm.
So I have not experienced in the four odd companies I've worked where, you know, people fear taking the decision because we know it's a collective decision. But the proof of the pudding,
Hmm.
Arjun, is what is your process to arrive at the decision? Do you get into a room,
Hmm.
debate it out, and have at least few people have at least some apprehensions, if not a strong dissent?
Hmm.
And how
Hmm.
do you tackle those
Hmm.
apprehensions? The more you minute that meeting and minute every meeting, do people become more confident to speak up? And the person who is
Hmm.
also in the deciding authority appreciates the fact that you brought up a different viewpoint,
Hmm.
and it's
Hmm.
democracy all the way. And if you don't have that, then of course you have a problem. And that is why it's
Yeah,
important.
it's like saying that yes men don't bring much value. I was like, yes men are good, but eventually diversity in opinion is not what the yes men's offer. So, uh, it's difficult to be at a loggerheads. It's not loggerheads actually. It's more about voicing and documenting your opinion and leaving it there. Let the decision go against or for what you feel. That's fine. But it's important to feel to speak up what you feel about a particular situation, and yeah, leave it there.
Absolutely. In fact, Arun, I would say that the person who's ultimately going to take a call should thank you for giving
Hmm.
not a red flag or orange flag, so that mitigants around it can be planned. So this is a
Absolutely.
theoretical concept, and if you are in a scenario where you feel that you will not speak up because it may go against your career, well, that's not a very nice space to be in. Find a company where you're
Hmm.
encouraged to
Hmm.
bring up those orange flags, if not red flags, and say it in a very polite but firm manner.
Hmm.
Build your credibility that you
Hmm.
have no malafide intention, and I think people will happily and
Hmm.
gladly accept it. And again, how you give that differenting viewpoint. If not in that meeting, send a personal note. There are various ways and means of how you give across a different viewpoint, if not a differing viewpoint. And as you grow in your career, you'll have to
Hmm.
learn this art. Otherwise, you will never grow. As I said, we are in the business of taking risks. Every company is, every employee is.
Hmm.
The higher you rise in the corporate ladder, we're all taking risks. And not all risks pay off. The company will guarantee you that anything which you speak up will be taken in a constructive manner, and will get documented,
Hmm.
and in fact all mitigants will be kind of found out to make sure that those concerns are addressed. That's why,
Absolutely.
even in the legal system, we have three bench judges and three bench
Hmm.
folks in the judicial system, so that there is a difference of opinion, there is scope for a difference of opinion. even in the RBI
Absolutely.
monitoring committee. The system encourages you. Try and encourage that. Try and make sure that people
Mm.
feel comfortable. And lastly, I would say that if you can't differ, then probably you're not going to do very far in your career. You have to
Very
you
important point.
have to take risks. There is no gain without pain, and you learn the art.
It questions
Don't try and
wisdom.
suppress yourself. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was like, I'm sorry, sir, I interrupted, but I felt then it questions the relevance of you being in that meeting. If you aren't, even if not always, but in the majority of time, if you don't have an opinion on the subject, then why are you there? I mean, that's where it rests.
Absolutely.
So,
And everybody brings some value, and it's not necessary that the top guy in the company is the only guy who has ideas. Quite to the contrary.
mm, absolutely. So you've shared great insights, and I've been really. It's been an honor and such a pleasure to have you on the show. But a few parting thoughts, and this is for those upcoming leaders who would be potentially at the helm of organizations, say a decade or maybe half a decade from now. Uh, you have rightly highlighted the importance of speaking up, of taking risks. More from a while this was more of a diversity and inclusion, you took the parameters of the discussion beyond to the subject of thought, also diversity of thought and how it has to be you know spoken
That's
up,
where it all
and the
originates.
relevance of it. Absolutely, I completely concur. The few parting words from you, sir, for on this subject for the next line of leaders who would be coming in the future.
So, couple of things. First is, your ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. That also is
Hmm.
diversity. Because what you learned in your school or your college, which was good for the next 30 years, is no more valid. Technology is changing,
Hmm.
business models are changing. So your ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn, which means you have to be fast. Even if you have to fail fast, learn from it and come
Hmm.
back, which means that you have to take your entire team along. So, learn, unlearn, relearn, and basically to be fast. Second is listen,
Hmm.
encourage diverse viewpoints, encourage diverse thought processes, try and have a diverse thinking team, try and do a
Hmm.
psychometric test. Don't get
Hmm.
too many people who think alike in your team. So the more
Absolutely.
diverse your team is in thought process, the better it is. Try and rotate folks in your organization. That's something which is unique. So in today's world,
Hmm.
everybody can learn the other person's job. Those watertight
Hmm.
compartments of one function cannot learn something else are all gone. Most of the work is done by the ERP. So the more you
Hmm.
get a fresh set of eyes and ears
Hmm.
will help
Hmm.
you get a diverse thought process through your tongue. So look for
Hmm.
diverse thought process by getting a fresh set of eyes and ears. Is my recommendation. And be nimble. Respond to the changing trends. Spend a lot of time in doing your own research. Be
Hmm.
approachable.
Hmm.
Master the art of communication, because it's
Right.
all about communication. And there is no right or wrong way. You have to find your own way. Because
Hmm.
remember, many a time what I've seen, communication is confused with your vocabulary, with your dialogue
Hmm.
delivery, your diction.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter.
Hmm.
As long as the person is
Hmm.
able to understand the message, it's the value which you're adding through a clear
Hmm.
thought process. So if
Right.
your thought process is clear, your ability to communicate will be clear. But do work on your communication is my suggestion, because I think as a leader, as somebody who wants to inspire and encourage diversity, your communication skills can always be better. That holds good for me as well.
Absolutely. I think, sir, to conclude, what I would want the audience to take away is to let go of one's inhibitions, and fears which are in mind, which potentially not only put themselves, their career at risks, but also the future of the organization they serve. So the more often you have, the opportunity to speak up, if you have a difference in thought opinion, it's important to voice that. I think that is what was the most important aspect of this podcast today. And I'm so grateful for you for taking out your time today and speaking to the audience and being a part of Unnati. It was such an honor and a pleasure hosting you, Samir sir.
Thank you, Arjun, for having me. And I think the more diverse we become in our thought process, DNI in every sphere of our day to day life is guaranteed.
On that note, sir, thank you so much for your time. Look forward to remaining connected, sir, and look forward to speaking to you soon.
Sure. Thank you, Arjun, and all the best to you and to everybody else who's watching this podcast.
Right, sir. Cheers. Take care, sir. Bye.